Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All Indie. Today we have some more dev talk. I am joined by Night here, the developer of Fade, the first chapter. How you doing?
Hello. What up?
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Before we start talking about your game, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
I'm a programmer. I originally went to Radford University. Didn't finish up because I had work stuff like that kind of situation. But once I got found like real work and stuff, I kind of just made game development my side passion that I work on, and I kind of eventually were able to teach myself the basics I would need to make a Souls like or just a RPG in general. And then I decided to attempt this project after I made a lot of different prototypes of it over the years and just learned different ways to do certain things.
Okay. So, what's your favorite game, like of all time?
Um, I like really over the top stuff, which is why I always lean towards like action games, stuff like that. But like not like action shooters, but like anything that involves like swords. Like I'm a huge fan of the Devil May Cry series.
Ooh,
Um,
okay.
but but my favorite game like to this day is probably like No More Heroes. Have you ever heard of that?
I think so.
It's like a Suda 51 like classic game where literally the whole concept is just straightforward. Literally, this guy wants to be the number one assassin so he can get the girl, and then it just leads to all this different stuff happening. He's got to kill all these different assassins and people, which none of them fall into the category of what you think is like a specific assassin, like what you would picture when you think assassin. Like one of them's like a cyborg guy who has like lasers that come out. He's basically a superhero. One person is just I guess like a Texan who really likes baseball because you fight him in a baseball stadium. Point is, the game's crazy, and it's like one of my favorite games I've ever played. Back on the Nintendo Wii, and then they made a sequel after that hit on PlayStation.
Oh, that's awesome. I googled it while you were talking about it. It kind of reminds me of like Persona. Is that accurate? Is that a little fair? Maybe less turn-based combat, but it looked like the same style at least.
Definitely maybe in art style, but not like in theme. Like Persona's
Okay.
like really upbeat and stuff. This like it's like hype and then tries to be gritty at random. Like I don't know if you saw any gameplay, but he literally like you one of the biggest key factors of the gameplay is you just hack people in half with a laser sword,
Yeah, I saw he looks like he's carrying around a lightsaber.
basically. But it's like it looks like a light fixture.
Oh wow. So, how did you get into gaming?
Well, my family has always been my grandpa used to be big into technology and stuff. Like he was in the military for like a long time. He worked for a satellite company called Intelsat like a long time ago. And essentially like he was really big into computers and technology, so he wanted to make sure that, all of his grandkids were big up on technology. So we had basically like when we were growing up, we had basically every console you could think of pretty much whenever they would come out. Like we had Dreamcast, we had SNES, we had what's another one? Sega Genesis. We were big fans of Sonic the Hedgehog and stuff like that. And then, over the years, we just kind of kept getting the new consoles whenever they would come out. And my older brothers were basically the people who guided me through all of it. And I've kind of always had a big open heart for video games and stuff like that, or anything involving technology in general.
Oh wow, okay. So, long time gamer is what it sounds like. If you're talking about
Yeah,
the Sega Genesis and Sonic, long time
yeah.
gamer.
I've been playing games apparently since I was like 1 years old.
Oh wow.
Now, definitely, I wouldn't call me playing games at 1 years old playing the game, more like just holding
Right.
the controller. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's actually funny that you mention it because my mom has a picture of me sitting at like this brand new computer that my parents bought, and I'm like maybe two, and of course nothing's plugged in, but I'm trying really hard to like type out paragraphs and like move the mouse and all that. So yeah, sitting there holding the controller, destined to play some more. So let's talk. So now that we know you a little bit better, let's talk a little bit about your game. You've been developing this game by yourself, right? All of
Yeah.
it. Wow. Um, how long did it take for you? how long was this game in development before its release in early December of last year?
Essentially, for that majority of that time period, I was working on it for probably like I want to say 6 months because originally I was working on another project, and it was basically picture the same concept, but the idea was you were in a like an endless dungeon, like a nightmare loop type thing. So you would
Ooh.
basically keep redoing the same dungeon and finding new equipment till finally you could like basically beat the boss. That was the whole concept. But I ended up not scrapping it because I didn't know enough about procedural generation to make it like link up the way I wanted. And then from there, I was like, but I know it works with a combat system now. So I had enemies where if you hit them a certain amount of times, they basically react and become resilient to getting hit to make you have to like know when someone's about to, about to knock you away from them. Or enemies where you had to hurt them a certain amount to make them go on their knees or stagger or whatever. And I used what I learned from that and the combat system I used for that, built off of DCS, a combat system in the Unreal Engine Marketplace. I used that to basically teach myself pretty much all the basics of having a combat system. And from there, that's how I kind of built everything I make now.
Oh wow. Okay. So was that the combat was trying to sort of wrangle the combat system? Was that like one of the most difficult parts of this, or would you say like did you have to model or anything like
Well,
that?
I think that's like where this comes in, like because remember I mentioned before this is just a hobby. Like this isn't my full time job or anything because I have a
Right.
full time job. But with this, it was like actually really fun and not really difficult to implement because the system I was building off of already had a lot of the groundwork. Now it doesn't do any of the complex stuff like some of the enemies you see me hit them and then you see like certain effects play and stuff like that, or enemies react to getting hit a certain way and play certain animation. Pretty much all that stuff was like me like changing things up and implementing things. And then over time I added more different things. For example, I know you might see you see the two in the top left right there on the
Yeah.
character's health bar. When you get to six, or I believe it's five, or when you're five and above, if you die and you're supposed to be dealt a killing blow, instead you'll knock back all the enemies around you. You'll be knocked back, and it'll set your health back to I believe 50% or 100%, and stuff like that. I had to implement that in general, and pretty much all these different features in the game were implemented by me over time as I kept playtesting it. So it was more so like instead of me like having to get over a hike trying to find the gameplay loop or find certain things, it was more so just I literally was playing the game over and over again, seeing what I liked and just adding different things to it and seeing what I could do.
Oh, okay. So I think I've said it in my first playthrough, and I think we were talking about it a little bit. Um, what games did you draw inspiration from when you were creating this game?
Well, originally the concept was I noticed that there was a huge resurgence in the fan base for Dragons Dogma, which I was really big into Dragons Dogma when it was like on release. Like it's one of my favorite RPGs. I remember being obsessed with it. I watched the Angry Joe video where he reacted to the game. He's like, "There's no fast travel. This everything takes forever. My companions won't shut up." But I was like, I kind of enjoy all the things he's complaining about. And then
Yeah.
I basically fell in love with the game from there. And I always wanted to attempt an RPG on that scale, but I was like, something like that's got to take like a bunch of people. So the goal for this is basically I'm going to try to over time use this as a hobby, make small feature after small feature, and put things together until I have like that system I want. For example, the combat's there, the exploration's there, questing, leveling up, making your character stronger, finding equipment. The only thing feature is missing that I could attempt to try to make it further towards Dragon's Dogma now would be like climbing. And then also I brought in Souls like elements like with the combat system because a lot of times in Dragon's Dogma, like if you hit an enemy, they let you get away with it because of
Yeah.
now some enemies just aren't that good when it comes to like protecting themselves. I made sure that pretty much every enemy in the game has, some option to make sure that you can't kill them so easily.
That's fair. Yeah, there's a lot of meat puppets in Dragon's Dogma. That's probably the best way to put it, where they attack and then you beat the hell out of them, and they just sort of stand there and take it.
Yeah, like especially like it's like a learning thing because like once you learn certain enemies' weaknesses, you kind of just
Yeah,
redo that same behavior, and it kind of simplifies those fights. But I feel like that's also what's important to that core loop because that game is very addictive even after you beat it.
yeah,
Because once you learn how to fight everything, you see that enemy, you immediately go into autopilot. Like I'm gonna do this. By the time you finish like autopiloting, killing that boss based on how strong you are, you've either spent like what 15 minutes fighting a giant troll or something, or an hour just fighting random enemies that you just keep walking into in the forest.
yeah. That's true. So, since we're talking about Dragon's Dogma, I think something that is very unique to Dragon's Dogma is the companion system, and that's
Yeah.
something you've implemented here. I'm very curious, and this might seem like a little bit of a silly question, but like, what is the overall purpose of companions? And I say that to mean like, are they there to join your party and be a like a strategic threat, or are they there to help push the story and the narrative, like maybe more in Dragon's Age?
Well, in this case, like there's some that are meant for the story. For example, there's one quest that's not doesn't have much to it. You basically help this one guy who's been kidnapped by bandits, and he'll show up later on in the next part of the game once I add that section in. But like there's a lot of different characters who have backstories who could possibly have different quests later on. I'm just building upon them, and then over time, eventually the goal was to try to at least raise enough funds to try to reach out to try to get someone else on the team, like an artist, so I can make some custom character models. So a lot of these models they may have some of them come off the marketplace and stuff like that. And then over time, the goal is to build out the gameplay and then slowly get rid of all these marketplace assets and replace them with something original. That
Ooh,
way
okay.
to make the project stand out better. For example, even the character's main model is just temporary. Like the main character is going to have a similar look, but also people are requesting either to make it so you can make him male or female, or that you can either customize his look. And one involves customization itself cost is going to cost a lot of time for an artist to basically make like different parts of just a character in general.
Right.
And it'd be another thing to have that implemented with the equipment system, which wouldn't be that hard. It's just like I always think about this the same way. Whenever I think about adding something new, I'm like, how much of a time hike is that going to be between the next update?
Right.
Like then I'll think, okay, I can do this before then, this thing someone wants before then, and then work on that update because it's going to take a while. For example, I did that for when I did my update on the enemies because the enemies used to be very primitive. And then I basically was like, I need to go through and fix this. But then I can't go have people go like I want to say like 2 weeks without an update. So I added I fixed quick saving and stuff like that, and I fixed the intro and I made a big deal about it and made all this stuff work out. But yeah, the overall goal is just to make sure that over time, all these assets I have, I'm just going to make sure I replace them with newer things that I've made custom.
Okay. That's awesome.
Oh, and then I didn't even answer your question. Companions overall are just meant to either push the narrative forward, or some of them are just meant to be really good improvements to your team. For example, this first one here, Kara, she
Yeah.
does have a link to one of the other characters in the lore, in the overall lore. For example, I'm not sure if you made it to you probably went to the Soul Seat. Did
Yeah.
you see the archer there?
Yes. The
Okay,
he
so
the person standing next to the statue, right, where you put in all your
yeah,
points.
yes, level
Yeah.
up statue. Um, Not going to go into detail, but there may be a link between her and that character
Okay.
because if you talk to that NPC, they talk about their past or whatever from the time period they're from, and that may or may not intertwine with hers.
Oh, okay. That's cool. So you were talking about how the monsters right now they're borrowed from Unreal Engine, or they're borrowed from some other sort of pre-existing library.
Yes, the Unreal Engine Marketplace has like a lot of different assets you can reach out to try to get, and then basically, when you have them, you can pretty much have free reign to use them any way you want. which is why like I always say like, okay, well, yeah, this is the game, but like I'm still adding stuff, still prototyping and stuff like this. For example, this enemy, yeah, I've made different changes to him or whatever to his model and stuff like that. But he's still overall a marketplace asset, and I would want to eventually to either modify the model further to make it more my own original thing, or try to reach out to an artist to get something custom and new. For example, like a lot of the wildlings, they are basically a similar breed right now, right? Where they're like either tribal looking people or they're like man that's been like expanded in size. Eventually, what I would do is I would just take some of these assets, replace them with new ones.
Okay. So I don't know if I'm gonna actually sit down at the kettle. I wanted to talk about the crafting system. Okay, so there is a crafting system in here, at least for brewing and potions. How far do you plan on taking the crafting system? I mean, do you plan on going all the way to like spells and weapons and armor, or
Oh, well, the goal was I was going to make it so I was thinking about adding a crafting system for armor because at first I thought like, oh, like the way Minecraft and all these other people do it, like it must take so much effort to like put all these recipes. It's not. You literally make a
really?
list. Yeah, you really just kind of like once you already have a system in place to keep track of items, which I already have when because I have to have an item system to keep track of all the items in general. You can literally just make a list of items that have like combinations in that list for that item, and then you store them to a data table. And then from there, whenever you open up that list, if you have that recipe, it'll check and see if you have it, and then it'll pop up for you and then show that you can make that item if you have those ingredients. And that's like once I figured out all that stuff, it was kind of easy to implement. So I was thinking like maybe later on, because there is an NPC who sells you like a wildling armor. I was thinking probably I could change it so he sells you the recipes instead. That way you could try to like go out and hunt because I realized that a lot of people are they're either playing the game for like 30 minutes, seeing what it's about, getting to the into the tutorial, or they're going full in looking for immersion. Like there was like a bunch of people who play the game for like 2 hours, 3 hours. And these people, I wish I could get more feedback on like what are they doing to spend so much time in the game? Because when I play it, like yeah, I tend to just get to the end of the content. That's because I know where everything is. So I
Right.
kind of just play through it. Now, for that though, it's like I kind of want to make sure that I want it to be deep. I want the crafting system to be deep. So I'm probably gonna bridge out to being able to make equipment, but I don't think I'll take it any further. I won't take it too far where you're making too much. But I definitely want to make sure that you have a list of potions and other things to make. And then as for making spells and stuff like that. I already have a different intention for that. The way it's going to
Ooh.
work is, let's say you have, there's already like, in some of the descriptions of items, it talks about scratch stones, right? The
Yeah.
concept's going to be if you get a specific scratch stone for a specific element, you can combine them to create a different spell from those scratch stones. For example, if you get one that does fire and then you get a burst scratch stone, you can get the combustion spell. If you get was it fire? If you get a burning scratch stone and then you get a pulse stone, it's going to basically fire like a big orb. It's going to move a little slow, but when it hits a target, it's going to expand and then blow up essentially and hit all the targets around where it is.
Oh, that's
And it's
awesome.
stuff like
Okay.
that. It's stuff like that I intend to like implement eventually. It's like because more so I'm trying to make sure because you get a lot of people who complain about like the frame rate here isn't too good in the overworld. And whenever I hear that, I immediately go into artist mode, like what can I get rid of to make the frames better here? And then next, I spent like 5 hours working on that.
Yeah. I didn't have any trouble with the frames. Uh, Although I don't know that I'm in any kind of intense area or anything like that, but I didn't have any issues with frames. I absolutely love that spell system though because I think there's crafting systems in and of themselves can be great. They can be a lot of fun. You can like personalize your character and create stuff that will fit your play style a whole lot better. But they can definitely be overwhelming. You know, and so I think being able to just combine a few scratch. What'd you call? I'm sorry. What are they called? Scratch.
Scratch stones, because the
Scratch
concept
stones.
is like
Okay.
basically the goal later on is to get an animation specifically for it. But the idea is you basically going to scratch it across armor or scratch it across like just different things, and then the element will be activated on it. So essentially, they
Oh.
only get activated if they get hit.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's awesome. I think for people, so is the light thing that's following me around, is that a scratch stone? That's like an activated one?
Yes.
Okay.
The concept is because originally I was like, yeah, I like hip lanterns and stuff. That was another idea that kind of came from Dogma, and I was
Yeah.
thinking like do ink like they do, but then I thought about like in a game like this isn't like Dragon's Dogma where you're gonna stop and get back all your resources. I'd rather you have one that was consistent. And a lot of people complain in Souls likes about lighting in general. So I'm like, I'll just go ahead and make sure they have this off the bat for now.
Sure.
And this way they have a scratch stone that just does radiance. Because originally I had a scratch stone spell where they'd activate it and this blue light would hover above your shoulder and it would levitate and stuff like that. But I was like, the blue light still makes things look dark. And then it was another thing where I'd rather just have something like this.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I like it. So we kind of talked about a little bit of your, or you've kind of talked a little bit about your development process. Um, where exactly did you start when it came to this game? You kind of mentioned you had a previous game that was kind of like a endless dungeon crawler. I mean, where did you start with that game? Did you start like on the combat or creating dungeons? Like,
Well, I basically I'm a huge fan of TED Talks, and the one I mainly looked into, I remember it was talking about gameplay loops in general, and basically they said if your game has anything to do with combat, your main practice should be to get the gameplay loop down on the combat first. So like what somebody does. For example, in this case, you walked up to that fight, you noticed you needed to pull out your weapon, you pulled up on the enemy, you could have backstabbed them, and you also had other options. You could see your options from there, and then once you kill the enemies, you look around for see if you can loot anything, and they drop items. And then from there, the combat loop's done. You go back to the base loop, which is exploration. So I basically had that other game to practice with, which is also going to be called it's called Fade, but I called it Fade the Alpha. The concept was just basically just to practice to figure out the thing. I put it on itch.io for free, if I recall. I'm not sure if it costs anything, but it's a very short experience. It's very primitive compared to this because I've made a lot of improvements since then. Um, and it basically pointed me in the right direction to get to this.
oh, okay. So, okay, now I gotta ask maybe one last technical question. Is there a feature you're working on? I mean, we've kind of talked a little bit about, like combining scratch stones and um, implementing a deeper crafting system. What else are you working on for the future?
Well, the last thing on like my list of things I would want to work on would mainly just be like this at this point, like stuff like that is kind of just like I know for a fact I want to do the scratch stones. One sec, got a notification. I know for a fact I want to do the scratch stones. I know for a fact I'm going to be doing the more recipes and stuff like that, longer list of recipes, and then the separate crafting system for crafting equipment and stuff like that. But other than that, I actually wanted to make a climbing system. I'm getting a ton of notifications. What's going on? Um, might have to take myself out of some group. But basically, goal, the other wish list thing would be like to have a climbing system in place. Because I know that like that's like one of the biggest key things that brought people to Dragon's Dogma and stuff like that. And that's one of the reasons why I was a big fan of it, which is why I started this project in the first place. So I was like, yeah, I want to have bigger enemies later on. So it'd be cool to have that. I just keep coming to this same logic in place though, is like my enemies right now will basically rotate towards whatever their main target is. So I need to make it so like when you're on them that you're not their main target, because if they start rotating towards you and you're on them, it's going to confuse the AI a ton. So there's like a bunch of stuff I need to work out, and then over time the goal would be to make sure the game is in a state to add that. Before then, I'll probably add because I'm. You've noticed? Have you backstabbed an enemy or anything like that yet?
I don't think so. I didn't realize you could backstab an enemy.
Yeah, it tells you during the tutorial. But essentially, like during the tutorial, you can basically go back. You can basically backstab enemies at the very start. and then from there you'll be able to basically do like a bunch of damage. That logic in place also applies to a front stab you can do if you break their guard. But the third way I can implement it would be making a grapple system for enemies. So I was thinking about adding a system for you to basically get on top of and grapple enemies to try to do more damage, like that, for smaller enemies. And then due to like a lot of my enemies right now are kind of medium sized, so there's nothing like too big. But I feel like if I do want to do a climbing system on certain enemies, I want that enemy specifically to for it to make sense. For example, like in Dragon's Dogma, you can basically climb on anything,
Yeah.
like any enemy,
Yeah.
regardless if the surface they have on their body is like a climbable type thing. I want to have it set in place so enemies have climbable parts of their body. Specifically, the troll enemy has a big boulder on its back. I would want that to be scalable. He also has scales and also has fur on the sides. I would want that to be scalable. But I wouldn't want his whole body to be climbable.
Sure, just like a weak, kind of like a weak point or a strategy sort of advantage over him.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
I don't want people climbing on people's faces or climbing like maybe like on some enemies, like if it's a furry enemy, you could do that. But I wouldn't want you just climbing on any enemy's face and just being flailed around or whatever, because they can handle all the animations for having something like that. Me, on the other hand, I only have like one animation or two animations right now for you losing your grip on a surface. I know that would be repetitive if like I set that up and put that in place, because everyone's going to see the exact same thing over and over again.
Sure. Okay, so I don't have any other technical questions. Is there something you maybe wanted to talk about before we moved on to a different subject?
Um, I don't really have anything besides so given that you came back, because I see here that it looks like you did make it back. You made it back to the soul seat through the little teleporter and through the mana well, and you came back here. So I'm guessing you weren't able to defeat the boss the first time around, like the tutorial boss.
Uh, the spider?
No, this guy right here.
Oh no, yeah, I was able to beat him. So what I did and what I realized. So I in my first playthrough, I had found the adventurer's tunic, the one that I'm wearing over the old ragged shirt, and I found a better sword. And I got to the cabin. I got to that cabin in the woods, like literally right before this, and was like, "Oh, well, I really want that equipment," and so I went back and got it, and then came back to the cabin and started wandering around again, and that's where I found the soul seat. So yeah, that was my first. That was my first attempt at beating the boss.
Okay, I got you. But yeah, I guess we'll talk about this since it's like directly in front of us.
I
This
was
is the
just
path system.
Yeah, I was actually just getting ready to ask you what your favorite like build is, but go ahead. Yeah, let's talk about the path system.
But yeah, each path basically will give you a free reward item, basically to tier towards like what you're trying to build. So I'm guessing, do you already know which one? Do you remember which one you picked?
Yeah, I took the this one. I'm trying to
Yeah,
remember
this is
what
definitely
the first tier is called. I remember Ravager and Destroyer. I don't remember the first tier.
yeah. I'm a huge fan of Guts and Berserk, the Berserk series. So like, I was like, I can make the tutorial that's like the free weapon you get for the fighter's path be any weapon, like regarding physical. Like I can make it a spear, I can make it a sword. I was
Sure.
like, what's the most warrior thing you could possibly have? A giant sword where you can't block and you just swing at things. So I basically made that the tutorial. It's like my favorite weapon to use. And then there's one thing I was gonna look into because I wanted to make it looks like you're playing on mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
The special skill you have with certain weapons, but it doesn't display it well enough for you with a mouse and keyboard. For example, like if you press the middle mouse button, you use a special ability. And in this case, since it's not showing you, you wouldn't really know how to do it. Like I'm guessing you didn't know like if that was a possibility.
No, I don't. I don't think so. I played around with some of the shift attacks, and I'm trying to think like the control. You have a bull rush when you have a shield. I think
Yeah.
that's a special skill, but I didn't know the middle mouse button was an attack.
Yeah. Essentially, it's like a shortcut to use this special ability because certain weapons have special skills. For example, the great sword you got from choosing this path has the ability to do like a windmill spin around you, which makes it real easy when you're surrounded by enemies. which is why I chose it to be the thing. I made sure that each path gets a weapon that basically makes life a little easier fighting in that path. For example, being a warrior, it's going to kind of stink when you've got ranged enemies or you're trying to chase somebody down. So what this does is it makes it so you take this slow swinging weapon, let's you land one substantial hit, right? And they try to run away. You go into the skill almost immediately, and you'll be flying towards them doing a windmill spin. Um, and then also there's going to be a side quest later on with that weapon as well. Because if you read the description, it says it's from an old family of hunters, and now basically play into the story later on. And then the other two paths, since you didn't see those, the magic path gives you a spell that releases wind energy to try to knock back enemies. So it's mainly meant to break guards. So it's mainly support, but it does do enough damage to kill like weaker enemies.
Okay.
And then the other path gives you a bow, but it's the old hero's bow. And the concept was a kid used to use it when he was in training. And the concept was he used it to take down a really big creature they didn't think he could kill. And the concept is he defeated it when he ran out of arrows by using pebbles. So the bow on the side of it has a bag of pebbles that are sharpened scratch stones that you can actually fling at things. And later on, I'm going to make a quest for you to kind of have it modified so it will shoot different kinds of scratch stones. For example, let's say it hit something and you had it attuned for fire. It would shoot fireballs at whatever you hit. Or technically, like, it'll shoot the pebble. It'll look like a pebble, and then it'll hit them, and then it'll explode.
Oh, that's awesome.
Is the concept.
Oh, I love it. All about that. Now I almost want to play the tutorial again and try and get the bow. So this is something that I've noticed a lot of. In your game already has like a lot of lore, a lot of storyline. It seems like, and a good amount of like quests. Does that help when you're developing a game like this, or is that just something you were like, you know what, I'm at a good point in development that I can start like implementing that stuff? Or
Well, I feel like to tie yourself more down to certain things when you're working on things, because it's very easy to lose sight of why you're doing things. For example, like picture you're working on a game mechanic and then you had no people to test it, you had no feedback on it, so you're not even sure if it's fun, and you've never seen it in another game. You'd have no idea of knowing if it was like something that people would actually want until you make it. So when I make certain items and make certain weapons, I have no idea if someone's going to want to use this sword over this one, which is why I have to create the narrative for that weapon. For example, certain weapons will say this weapon's crafted from this kind of material, it came from this location, it's from this people. And by creating that lore to it, you can kind of get a general idea of how to give everything stats. And it makes it easier for me to submit my like different items and stuff I add into reality. For example, for that great sword that you just got, essentially it only does 40 damage or around 40 or 35 damage for a great sword, for a sword that big. But the concept is it's old, it's rusted, so it doesn't cut like it used to. And also it's kind of light compared to other great swords. So you can swing it faster, which makes it easier for you to like train your great sword skills in order to basically learn it. Which kind of where the skill system comes in later, because the more you use a weapon, you go up in mastery, and then when you reach a master who can teach you how to like learn certain skills, you can ask them and they'll teach you new abilities.
that's awesome. I never would have guessed, I guess, in that sense. I kind of always thought that maybe lore and maybe quests would come last, but I mean, that makes perfect sense. That's really awesome.
Well, I feel like it also has to do with like if you already know what your main narrative is, because there's some people like they attempt stuff like this without really having like much knowledge of what they want to attempt. I already had a good idea because um, I can't mention my current job I work at, mainly
Sure.
just because just public reasons.
Right, right, right.
But I used to work at Amazon like a long, long time ago, and basically when you're working there in like the picking department, you're basically just going around this facility, 3 floors, picking stuff up nonstop and just working. And then like what 15, you get two 15-minute breaks where it's like you're expected to do 5 minutes to the break room, 5 minutes enjoying your break, and 5 minutes back. My only way to cope with how stressful all this was, and then like having like a very short lunch, was just to just think about different stuff that I want to make. So overall, I kind of had the idea for this game for a long time, and the whole overall lore and everything, to the point where I already have like in my head, like if I do want to keep making sequels, I know exactly where I plan to go. Because you know how it is. Like when you have an idea, you think about, if this was really good, where would the grandeur go? Like
Yeah.
where would be your like next really big idea, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know. I
For
know what
me,
you're saying.
I kept having this idea of making an MMO, and I'm like, I know it'd be impossible for one person to make one. Just with sheer effort or whatever, unless you already had a main mechanic down, you already had a lot of funding and stuff like that, and you had all the resources to make a unique game. And I was basically like, that's going to what the goal is going to be. So the backstory of this game is like very further, like this is like going to be the first where it starts. And then every single time I add like either more to this game, or when I make my next my sequel to this, the concept's going to be like the lore is just going to keep advancing until finally get to that point where the only trade off or thing that could come next would be an MMO is the concept.
All right. Hey, I mean,
Because the
if you're
last part of the story is it's too big to be a one person game, which is another hike I have to get over because I don't have any experience with multiplayer games, which is what my next goal would be after this project.
okay. Yeah, I was gonna. That's actually something I wanted to ask you. Do you plan on adding multiplayer here, so maybe like your friends can play as companions?
That definitely would be the intention for a sequel, for either split screen or I want to say online split screen per se. You know, like online, like someone else is in your game, something like that. That would be the idea for the future. The main issue I ran into, because I actually like try to go through that process, is I have to replicate all the different features of the game to account for you having two players or more than one player. And that's where the difficulty comes in. So for me to do that, I would definitely want to team up with like a specialist when it comes to Unreal Engine and multiplayer. And then with their feedback and stuff like that, I'd basically create my different gameplay mechanics, stuff like that, with them in mind, and they would implement to make sure it's replicated across the server and make sure it's replicated well, so it's not laggy or you're not seeing people teleport.
Right.
Like, have you ever played Phasmophobia? I think that's what it's called, or
No, but yeah, I know the game you're talking about.
yeah, a lot of those games, like they come out and people are like, "Oh yeah, it's really cool to play multiplayer with my friends in a horror game and stuff like that." But then like games younger than Phasmophobia, when they came out, they could have terrible like connection issues or replication to the point where you're having fun with your friends, but your friends are teleporting. You don't know what they're
Yeah.
doing. It's literally crazy. I know. Last thing I want to do is create an RPG that has that kind of problem.
Sure. Okay, so I think you've answered all of my like technical story related questions. I kind of wanted to one ask you some Steam related questions if you're okay with that, and then ask you some fun questions.
Sure.
So I think the original post that I saw your game on was you had sold 500 copies since its release. If I'm not mistaken, this game released December 9th of last year. So
I
you're
do believe
at
it was December 9th.
yeah. So you're at what is that, like 4 months? Or going on five, somewhere in there. And I think five.
Possibly. I'm terrible at time and dates and math in general. If it's not an equation for having to deal with damage mitigation, I'm lost.
Okay, all right. So we'll just say it's been roughly 4 months, and 500 copies is a pretty good, I would say, pace for an indie game. I think for any other developers listening, I mean, what do you think helped you get to that number in a short time? What do you think hurt you? Like, is there something that you did like during development that you think helped you out?
Well, my key would be kind of like to learn the landscape, because over time, before I even attempted this project for a long time, I looked into ways that other indie developers were basically promoting their product or getting it out there on seeing like getting people interest and stuff like that. Steam in itself does a great job for advertising, which is like why it's such a great tool, because it's like you can get on that marketplace. You only have to pay like I think $100 to get your game out there, and then from there it's all up to you because they take their cut, you have your cut, and they're going to advertise for you when you put your game into early access because it's going to pop up on the page because it's going to show up as a new release game, and then also there's other features to make your game pop up again when you release updates and stuff like that. So essentially, I kept doing whenever I release an update, it'll automatically push my game out and show people like what I added and stuff like that. And eventually, the goal just became, oh hey, there's tons of ways to promote the product, which is why people need to reach out. That's what it always comes down to. Because before I started working this game, I never did anything with Reddit, like ever. Like Reddit was something I didn't really bother with or whatever. It just seemed like a place where people, whenever I hear about Reddit, it always had to do with like Twitch streamers or something negative happening. So I stayed away from it. So when I
That's
got on
yeah.
it and found like people were, posting stuff about indie games and stuff like that, I was like, okay, so this one dude, I think his game is about a fox and exploration, and his pictures that he would post these gifs that people would say this looks beautiful, and that alone promote his product to being popular. So I'm like, okay, so the best bet would be to make highlights from the game, from development changes, new stuff, and post that on a schedule to make sure that I get to reach out to the most people so people see it, so people know that the game's being worked on still. And eventually you'll pick up pace because I think what took place was I had a YouTuber I follow. I reached out to him. We are his Discord's We Are Dev Addict. I think he just called himself Dev Addict on YouTube. Essentially, he did a video on the game, and it was like in the early stages. He actually is supposed to be I think he told me he was planning on making a new video on it since I had a bunch of updates. But he played it when it was like in its really early stages, where there's like a ton of bugs and stuff. But him playing it that one time literally made it so like I think like 60 people went and tried the game, and they just played it, and then just I fixed that bug within the next day. So the bug he encountered that stopped him from completing the demo, no one else had to deal with that. So those people just kind of stayed, kept playing the game, and kept seeing the updates. And then I guess eventually they told their friends, and then I got more people to play it. But the biggest hump besides that YouTuber was C4G, Click for Gameplay. His channel, he made a video on it where he basically was talking about like top 5 or top 6 like early access titles to look out for, early access RPGs. He put me at his number 5 game choice, and that, since I was the first game to pop up on the video, that like that was huge. Like within the next day, I loaded up Steam to look and see like the sales and stuff because I was getting notifications. It popped up and said 40 people had bought it in just the day after his video, and I literally dropped. I was like, "What's happening?" And then from there, I got really passionate about the game because I was getting a lot of good positive feedback. People telling me to keep it up, and it's come a long way since then. Like, which I hope those people who are playing then still like are willing to go back and play it now because it's definitely changed a lot. Now they will have to probably start the record over because they're missing out on a lot of different things from the tutorial now. But if anything, it'll be another way for them to enjoy the game again. Because I even went through because I think what was it? Some video I watched a long time ago said keep your game fresh even in early access. So I started changing like enemy locations and changing item locations and adding side quests and stuff like that during this tutorial just to make sure the game feels fresh every single time I update it.
That's awesome. See, this goes. If any other indie devs are watching, YouTubers are here to help. Let me tell you.
Oh yeah, definitely reach out to them. And then I think last thing would be make sure you have social media, like stuff like that, because I thought Twitter was like impossible to get popularity on before I realized that I wasn't hashtagging things, and then suddenly I started getting a bunch of feedback because that post I made for the 500 copies sold, that in itself managed to get like 20 people to reach out and try to play the game.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think having as an indie developer, I think having a social media presence is very important. Yeah,
Yeah,
because I mean, I recently read a post about I think it was like a old school tower defense game that this developer and his wife were working on, and he was like, "Yeah, we just ignored social media at all, and like at launch the game did okay, but you know it just wasn't as good as what it could have been." So
Hmm.
okay, down to some fun questions. Have has your family and friends, have they played your game? Have they given you feedback, play tested?
Well, my girlfriend played it yesterday, and she was just panicking the whole time and refused to use more than one finger on WASD. So she was just running straight at things, and just she died probably within like 15 minutes of just walking outside. But that was fun to watch. And then a few of my friends have played it. A lot of my friends, which is like I guess is like the disconnect I have because I'm a PC gamer, and all my PC friends have basically moved away to like far away places. So I can't really see them that much unless I'm on Discord. And all my friends from college are still down here, but they're all Xbox gamers. So it's
Oh,
like, so I would just get on Xbox Live to hang out with them, which is why I get on Xbox through through Windows right now to whenever I want to talk to them because I can join their Xbox Live party from my computer, and that kind of works out because my Xbox literally died like I want to say like 3 years ago, and I want to get the new one. But I haven't gotten it yet, but for now I'm kind of just settling for just joining their party and just talking to them and stuff while I work on the game. That way, I'm still getting social with people. I'm not just closing myself off to working on the game for hours.
sure.
Um, but yeah, it's kind of like I've had a lot of people try out the game. Um, I guess like what helps me the most when it comes to like getting family to try it is if it's someone who's familiar with that genre already. Because I had one friend who had actually played all the Dark Souls games, and he played the game extra early, and he saw where I was going, and he basically said you could take this very far if you add in the right features. And then every time he plays it, I always generally get a good amount of insight.
That's awesome. It's always good to have somebody around who, one, knows what you're like, what kind of what you're going for, and two, who also understands gaming in general. So feedback, playtesting, also very important. So what I think we talked a little bit about this. What is your favorite build to run in your game, and why? Is it the greatsword build, or do you have another one?
Um, well, in my variant of the game I play, I generally have like the same kind of weapons I test for balancing and stuff. So whenever I played, I generally use different weapons. And I did play through the demo recently, now that I added all the new stuff and stuff like that and the recent things. I would say that if I were to have a build, I would basically just go straight damage and then put a little bit into focus because the fireball spell is really effective when you can't get to enemies. It's really good in general. And then there's a few spells. I'm not sure if you got to this quest line when you get to town, but there's a way to save the town, one of the town's mage apprentices. You just kind of have to figure out where he is because they don't give you confirmation on like exactly where he is. He's just gone missing. You find that out by asking a rumor from one of the other NPCs you can talk to. And from there, once you save him, he sells different spell options. For example, he sells a combustion spell. He sells a great magic spear spell, which allows you to picture like you pick up a big boulder over your head. Instead, it's just pure energy. Like it's a ton of mana you chuck into this huge orb, and it does a massive amount of damage, but it takes forever for you to throw. Is the main difficulty. Um, Essentially, you're not I used to play an MMO called Mabinogi where you could basically use any skill regardless of your class, right? And I was like, I want this in RPGs because I don't like RPGs where you tend your gameplay so far towards one thing you can't use utility stuff from other types. So I was like, okay, I'll make it so you can basically use all these spells regardless of your knowledge. You'll just have a weaker version of it. So essentially, I'd put a bunch of points into strength, use a great sword, and then whenever I needed to heal people, I'd probably switch to a healing spell because those are in the game too. And then also I'd probably switch to a fireball spell for distance stuff like that. Because I mean, there's no reason not to use the spells since you can still use them. You just won't get as much damage as someone who put all their points into focus.
Sure. Okay. So do you have a favorite companion or like a least favorite companion, a companion you hate?
The most annoying companion I've made so far would have to be Kara because
Really?
she was out of all the companions, she's like kind of like it's like because it was always an argument in my head. I'm either going to make the first companion a healer, which would make sense, they're healing people on the battlefield, they came to protect you. But
Sure.
then what happens when someone doesn't know what they're doing too well in the game at the early on? That means this person's going to be healing you, but you're still going to be getting beaten to a pulp. So I was like, I need to make it so it's not a healer, it's an archer, but it's an archer who you can probably use throughout the early game to try to make sure things are a little easier because I, I think the best way to look at it is archers in most games are kind of like turrets. The concept is they need to do as much damage as possible while keeping themselves safe, so you don't have to, be that reliant on them. Now,
Sure.
there's another archer in the game who is more agile and you can dodge way further away than she can, which is why they'd be my go-to. But for her, she's the most annoying because not only is she like low health, low armor, starter, you can only pick her up once before she dies the next time she gets hit. Like she had a bug when I was working on her originally where she basically like whenever she would go to a different area, her dexterity would go up by 10. So I was like, why is this only happening for this character? So eventually, like I started realizing I'm not doing damage to these enemies anymore. She is. She was one-shotting things by the time I got to the end of the demo. And I was so confused for like the longest time as to what it was, but I kept leaving it alone. And I kept thinking, like, once I figured it out, how many people in the demo have taken advantage of this and just let her just wipe out the entire game towards the end?
They're just like traveling back and forth to places, and it's like, okay, cool. Now she has infinite dexterity, and I'm just gonna sit back and watch her rain hellfire upon all of my enemies. That's really
Basically,
funny.
if
It's
you
so
wanted, you could
funny.
literally walk into you could go from this area you are now and walk forward and then go back, and it would just go up by 10 each time. I got weirded out real quick. My computer just the screen went black for me not touching the mouse, creeped me out. But yeah, there was a huge bug with her. And then if I were to set up a different group of companions, my normal go-to is to have her. There's a healer named Kieran in the in the Seekers Guild you can hire for like 5,000 gold, I think. And then Kane, he's the guard you meet throughout the tutorial as well. And then from there you'd have your team of four. And then I feel like that's pretty solid. Like a healer, an archer, and a person you can use to also be a warrior. But later on, I'm gonna add in some of the more like useful people and stuff like that, and companions of larger statures. Like you might have noticed there's a weapon type in the game for hammers, right?
Yes, I think so.
So there's a great hammer like move set, and there's like 6 great hammer skills you can unlock by increasing your mastery. There's a lot of skills actually. It's just I haven't given access to people for a lot of those things mainly because I want to make sure that I get everything perfect when they get unveiled. For example, the sword mastery, stuff like that for just using a sword and shield, that's already in the game. Bow skills, that's already in the game. Um, not great swords, two-handed swords, like if you were using a halberd or something like that, not halberd, using a this Y-hander, that's one of the swords you can get all the skills for that now. But a lot of the other things I'm still working out just to make sure, but later on I plan on adding a companion who uses the great hammer, a companion who uses twin daggers, a companion who uses a spear, which I think I already added that. There is a companion who uses a spear at the Seekers Guild, because there's actually, I think I've lost count at this point. I want to say there's like 7 different weapon types, or 8.
Wow.
There's spear, twin blades, sword and shield. One-handed with a sword kind of counts, but you still use the same skills as though you had a sword and shield. Um, you've got hammer. If I didn't already say that, great sword, I guess you can count archery and magic since those are different poses. And there's another one in there, but I always forget what it is.
All right, so I think I got one more question, and just to maybe try to talk a little bit about the future of the game. Do you have a favorite boss, or is there one you're working on that is potentially your favorite?
Currently, one of my favorite boss I've made visually is the spider boss at the end of the tutorial. Like visually, that's my favorite boss. Like I designed that armor on the boss. I designed and modified the body of the spider. I did a lot of changes to that animation for it, and that was like my win or lose. Like if my tutorial boss does not look good, how am I going to make anyone keep playing after the tutorial? So that was kind of like that's like my baby. Like that's my favorite thing. That's my favorite boss I've made visually. My favorite boss I've made, like when it comes to gameplay wise, I want to say is well, I guess it depends. Like how far did you get in the demo?
The end here, the end of this video is how far I got. I got to the I picked up Kane, trying to think, and I found the chieftain. What's his name? Went through the cave, found the twins in here, and then where's the last? Yeah, I think he's the champion, the wildling champion. I think that's what he's called, and that's I think where I stopped.
Oh, okay. Well, definitely, I recommend playing a little further because, like, because there's the because there's him, but he's more so he's just like a mini boss enemy. He's kind of just like weaker. But other than him, the boss that it's between these two bosses you haven't seen yet. There's a mana golem, which is think about it as a concentrated mana, right? Picture
Sure.
like a homunculus, right? Like someone made like something that's supposed to like be a human, look like a human, and it's meant to guard this certain location. So the boss in question summoned this creature to guard this location, which is how you get a mana crystal to activate the mana well to teleport around. So there's like 4 quests involved where you have to first you have to defeat this thing. Then when you defeat it, it opens up the passageway to get to the boss I'm referring to, which is like this long path, and then you get access to the mines, and that's one of the main pivotal things of the first chapter, taking out the mines and taking out the boss there so people can get access to the mines again, and then they can armor their forces to do other things. But this boss in particular, I'm gonna give you information on it. It has one of the shards you've heard about in the intro, one of the Oathbreaker shards, strapped to its back, giving it the power to teleport, summon duplications of itself, so it summons up multiple versions of its own kind. And then on top of that, it also shoots fireballs from its hands, as well as teleporting around the room.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, and then its main gimmick is it whenever it like uses a lot of its magic to summon a piece of the shard, it basically gives to these other creatures it summons in their staffs. So these other ones will have these staffs, and when you kill that enemy, it'll for a short period of time weaken that enemy because they're kind of keeping his barrier up. He keeps summoning a barrier to protect himself, and by you breaking that or killing those creatures that have those shards, you can basically make him weak for a little bit of time. Right now, if you do kill him, you get access to a second path because the concept is every time you complete a big goal or defeat a big boss, Kaith rewards you with another path to choose or another gift to get stronger.
Okay. Dude, that's awesome. You've I on top of that, I think you've answered all my questions. Yeah, this is an awesome game. I'm super excited to play more of it. I do plan on playing more of it. Thank you so much for your time. You've answered all of my questions. You've been really awesome.
No problem. Happy to be here.